Suber, and I am here with a very specific book collection. So these are not all the books that I have. I have tons and tons and tons of books because who doesn't love books, right? So but these books represent minority groups, and I think that these books are great books to have in the classroom because children of minority groups are able to relate. They are able to see that success does come from where they come from, and I just think that they make children really knowledgeable on things of the past and of the present. So here, many of these books I did get, many if not majority of these books I was fortunate enough to get through an internship that I participate in, and so the internship is geared towards just empowering minority students. And so here we go. We have Tamika and the Wisdom Rings. This is a chapter book. It's a good book for elementary students. It talks about real life struggles in the African American community, so that's a good book. We have I Dissent. It's a book about Ruth Bader Ginsburg, and so of course it's about women's empowerment and showing young women that they too can rise and have a voice in politics, so this is a good one. Then we have a book about Barack Obama, walks through his childhood, and again represents a person of the African American community, or as some may say biracial community, and shows them that you too can be a success story. Then we have Follow the Drinking Gourd. This is an older book, somewhat of a classic book, and it does talk about slavery and how slaves followed the Big Dipper to find their way to freedom. So that's a good book that teaches about African American heritage as well. Then we have Freedom Over Me. This book I found at, I believe, Books A Million or Barnes & Noble. But anyways, it's a tale of, I believe, 11 slaves, and so they tell their different stories. So that's another good book about African American history. Then we have The Good Garden. The Good Garden is actually about the Hispanic heritage, and so it teaches perseverance, picking up new traits, learning new traits, and learning how to maintain and just create a better way of life for oneself and one's family. So that's a good book. And then we have In Her Hands is the story of sculptor Augusta Savage, and she's an African American, so that's a very good book. African American history and culture. We have Rise from the Caged Bird to Poet of the People, Maya Angelou. Maya Angelou is a renowned African American poet who is now deceased, but very good book to inspire young African American children who are interested in poetry or art or just self-expression. Love it. Then we have Crossing Bachito. This book addresses the friendship between slaves and Native Americans. So it actually addresses two minority groups. It's a very good book, and like I said, it tells the tales of slaves, but it also tells the traditions and the story of a specific Native American group. Then we have the story of civil rights hero John Lewis. John Lewis actually just passed away, and I was really saddened when I heard of his passing, but this is a good book. It teaches about like the Bloody Sunday Massacre. It teaches about what John Lewis stood for, the different figures that he was inspired by, and so that's a very good read as well. It is a chapter book, and so for lower elementary school students, they would need help reading this book, but very good book for upper elementary and middle schoolers. Then we have The Proudest Blue. This book addresses those of the Islamic faith, and so it again represents a minority group. So that's a very good book, and it just teaches people of the Islamic faith to embrace wearing a hijab and embrace being who they are. So that's a good book as well. The Oldest Student. This is another book geared towards African American history, and it just teaches how African Americans were not always given the privilege of reading, learning to read and write. And so I think this book is inspirational in that it teaches children to take advantage, especially minority children, to take advantage of the opportunities they have to read and write and become well-educated, well-rounded students. And then we have Lillian's Right to Vote. This book is historical fiction, And I like this book because it walks through Miss Lillian's life, and it walks through the lives of her ancestors as well. So it goes all the way back to, I want to say, like her great-great-grandfather and how he was a slave, and then her great-grandfather, and then her grandfather, and then of course it trickles down to Miss Lillian. But it goes from talking about slavery all the way up until President Lyndon B. Johnson signing the Voting Rights Act, when Miss Lillian got the opportunity to vote. So that's that. And then we have poets. I think, yeah, The Remarkable Story of George Moses Horton, excuse me. So it's poet, and he was actually a slave who wrote poetry. So that's another good inspirational book for African American students who may be inspired to write poetry or just write different forms of literature. And then we have Moses. Of course, it's the story of Harriet Tubman, again, African American history, and it just kind of explains Harriet's life and what she did and what her contributions were to the freeing of African slaves. And then this one, I actually had the privilege of reading today. It is called The Doctor with an Eye for Eyes, and it's the story of Dr. Patricia Bath, who actually passed away last year, and just how she overcame. Now, this is a good one because it addresses two minority groups, women and African Americans. So not only did she become an African American success story, but she became a African American woman success story. And she was in medical school with all guys, and her desk was put in a dim room with no light, just a lot of things thrown in her path to discourage her. However, she became an amazing doctor who contributed much to the technique of laser eye surgery and things like that. So that is it. Those are just a few books that I have in my collection. I have a lot more about different minority groups, but those are just a few I had at hand, like in my access. So yeah, I hope you guys enjoy. I hope you're able to use these books in your classroom, and just so that people and children of minority groups are able to see how well represented they are, because a lot of times children are in school and they don't really see themselves being represented in the studies and in the books. And I think it's important that children are exposed to the success stories of their own heritage. Again, thanks for watching, and we hope to come at you with more videos here on Teaching Tales.